Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey MBA applicant, welcome to the Touch MBA podcast, where we're all about helping you find the best MBA program that's going to be a great investment for you. And of course, we want to help you get into those programs. I'm your host, Darren, and this week we had Rebekah Lewin, the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Student Engagement from Simon Business School, on the show. Simon Business School is part of the University of Rochester. And my big takeaway from our talk was Simon's focus on rigorous training through the lens of analytics and economics, and that if you attend this program, you're going to be able to sit at the table with top business leaders and be confident that you can help make the best decisions. It's a smaller program, so there's more personal attention. There's about 100 students per cohort for the 2-year program and about 50 students for the accelerated 18-month version of the MBA. And we have some really frank discussions about what Simon is looking for, and we get into the nitty-gritty of, for example, how to show your quantitative skills and ability for a quantitative heavy program like Simon. If you need help figuring out which schools fit you best and you want to get some feedback on your profile, go head over to touchmba.com and we'd be happy to give you some free, that's right, free help with your school search. That's what we specialize in, and that's the big change we want to make in this industry, is to help people figure out which schools fit them best. There's so many. How do you know which one that is? So go check that out at touchmba.com, and let's get on with it. I'd like to introduce my next guest, Miss Rebekah Lewin, who is the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Student Engagement at Simon Business School at the University of Rochester. And Rebekah has been with Simon for a long time, and she's worked for Simon and the University of Rochester in a variety of admissions roles since 1998. So she knows the school through and through. And more importantly, she got her MBA from Simon in 2002. So she's been a student, and now she runs admissions and student engagement. So Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us on the Touch MBA podcast.
It's great to be here today. Thank you. I come from a perspective of working in admissions, and specifically MBA admissions and master's admissions, for a number of years. And the commentary today is going to really be a combination of my own experiences working at the business school at University of Rochester, but also many, many years of conversations with my colleagues at other top business schools. And I think with a motivation to not only introduce you to a superb MBA program at University of Rochester, but also to hopefully give you some advice about how you can stand out and be a successful candidate when you go through the application process. One of my favorite things to tell candidates is that it's in both of our parties' best interest for you to have a good understanding of what our expectations are as you go into the application process. That way you have a higher likelihood of achieving success and a positive outcome when you go through the admissions process. So looking forward to sharing some tips and helping you to learn more about University of Rochester and the process.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. That's exactly what we're trying to do here on the podcast, on the Touch MBA podcast. So we really appreciate your insights. So the first question I'd like to ask is simply, what makes the Simon MBA unique from other top business schools?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer it not just from what I know from working in admissions, but also from going through the experience a few years ago. And some of the things that were part of my experience, even though it was more than a decade ago, are really kind of the fabric of what makes the business school unique here at University of Rochester. And so I'm going to touch on 3 main things. The first is that on the continuum of different types of curriculum, there's some types of curriculum that are entirely case-based. There's some that are more analytic and quant-based. And we're probably more to slanting toward the analytic quant-based. We certainly have cases within our MBA program, but there's a framework of economics that permeates all of the different classes within the curriculum. Most schools have an economics class that may be part of their MBA curriculum, but we take it a step further and believe that economics really drives business decisions regardless of the industry that you're working in, and realizing that in many cases the industries that may develop over the next, say, 5 to 10 years are not even ones that business schools are even talking about right now. And so understanding the way that economics drives business decisions, the incremental benefits and the incremental costs that need to be evaluated and analyzed is really going to be important, not only in terms of the decisions that a candidate's making themselves, but ultimately in the recommendations that they're making to their senior managers and knowing how their senior managers are thinking. And so that's really something that I think is quite unique and that will equip our graduates, not just for the very first job that they take after business school, but as their career evolves, they'll find that the power of the tools that they've developed through the curriculum and through their training are going to be very valuable, not just right away, but grow as their career grows as well. The second thing that I think is somewhat unique is that we're a bit of a smaller, more community-based classroom experience. And that's something that really appeals to students that are looking for personal access and support and interaction with faculty and with the staff within the business school. So to have such a immediate opportunity to have individual or small group conversations with amazing faculty that are at the very top of their field, and to have an opportunity for small group or individual interactions with staff, particularly in student services and in the career management center, as someone is exploring different career paths, is really very valuable. It also really helps to develop strong and lasting relationships with your classmates and with alumni. And so those are all things that we try to facilitate and develop during our MBA experience. And then the last one is somewhat unique, especially taking into context that we are a smaller school, and that's the diversity of the school. Over the years, we've had students come to us from more than 100 different countries around the world. And in any given MBA class, we might have students from 20 or 30 different countries. And so to have a cohort of only, say, 125 or 150 students, but to have that diversity from different parts of the globe right in your classroom experience, and in Rochester, New York, of all places, is, I think, a really interesting experience that our students have. And so they're able to leverage the global breadth of the alumni network, but within a small size atmosphere that really allows for very deep relationships as students go through the program and even after they graduate.
I'd love to learn more about that first point you made about how Simon has this point of view that business should be seen through the framework of economics. And I noticed that 2 of your core courses are Framing and Analyzing Business Problems 1 and 2. And that's the first time I've seen that, looking at a lot of MBA programs. So could you just expand a bit more on what that means when you went through the program and to students now?
We want to make sure that students not only understand the different tools that are available to do analysis. In your first job or two, you might be doing some of the analysis. Obviously, as you grow in your career, you will probably not be doing the analysis. People will be doing it, but you still need to be able to interpret it and determine the validity of the information and the analysis that has been done as you're making informed business decisions as a senior manager or maybe even as an entrepreneur. And so we do provide not only training and understanding different tools and frameworks that will be helpful, but also getting the right answer is only half of the process. And from our perspective, we've probably all encountered people either in our personal lives or in our work lives that are just very persuasive individuals, and they may not even have the right answer, but they can make it sound really good. And I think our goal is to make sure that not only do you come up with the right answer or the best answer, because there may not be one right answer, there could be a continuum of different options, but once you have what you believe to be the best answer for that given situation, that you're ultimately able to effectively communicate that. And so we give a variety of different opportunities to practice application, both within those 2 particular courses, but also there's some projects courses and consulting courses that students have an opportunity to take as they progress through the experience that will really leverage the skills and tools within a particular career path. So maybe perhaps within consulting or within brand management or within the financial area. Those are key areas where we're looking to help students actually apply those tools into particular career paths as they're preparing for a career after they graduate.
I see toughen up all over your website. What do you mean by toughen up?
So that's the result of a brand repositioning that the school went through within the past 18 months or so. Part of a branding campaign is trying to determine the intersection between what might be unique about your program and how that intersects with what's valuable or important to constituents that might be somehow engaging or interacting with the business school. And so we actually went through an exercise where we asked our current students, faculty, staff, alumni, senior leadership, corporate recruiters, basically all of the different audiences that would have a vested interest in seeing the school succeed and positioned in a way that would be impactful. And one of the things that really stood out was the rigor of the training that the students received and how that positioned them not only for success in getting a job after business school, but for their performance on the job after they graduated. And there was a consistent theme around the fact that the curricular experience was rigorous, but that the students felt supported during that experience, both through their support from faculty, as well as the staff and surrounding resources that the school offers. And so the theme around Toughen Up is really that we do provide a rigorous academic experience for students, but we're not making it rigorous because we want students to fail. On the opposite, actually, we're actually looking to help students to really stretch themselves and develop their potential in ways that they may not have even anticipated or expected when they came into the business school experience. And so that's really who and what we're about, and taking a more personal approach to helping students to achieve their potential when they come into the Simon Business School.
Yeah, and related to that is, what is the student culture like at Simon Business School for someone who may never have a chance to step foot on campus?
Because we are a smaller cohort experience, it is something where you will get to know your classmates very, very well. And I feel that the students become very collaborative. You're assigned into a study team during the core classes of your first year of the program. And so we're intentionally putting you into a study team experience with people who are different than you, different geographies, different industry or work experiences, different personal backgrounds, and strengths and weaknesses. And it's designed to help make sure that the students feel supported and maximize not only their individual contributions to the team, but the overall team experience as well, both in terms of the learning that takes place academically, as well as the personal development that takes place as students really develop their ability to contribute within a team experience. So that's, I think, a part of it academically. Students also have a lot of opportunities to get involved outside of the classroom, and that's something that we actively look for in the admissions process when we're evaluating candidates is students who have demonstrated initiative, have a desire to get involved. There are a number of co-curricular experiences. There are opportunities to get involved in graduate assistant roles or leadership roles, working in the admissions office and the career management center and a number of key committees. And so you'll find that students typically are picking 2 or 3 key areas that might be their passions or interests. They might be related to careers. It might be related to hobbies and personal interests, or based on their background or particular affinities that they have. And there really are a number of ways that students can give back and get involved during their experience and really make an impact. So I would say that that's another key feature. I think that students ultimately find that because of the connections they make during business school, that they don't just leave with a professional network, but they leave with friends. And I think that that's kind of a consistent theme, that people stay involved in each other's lives. I've known students that post-graduation have traveled sometimes even halfway around the world to participate in a wedding of a classmate or attend a wedding of a classmate. And I think that that speaks to the deep roots that are developed during that business school experience.
You beat me to my next question, which is, what is it like when you're a student to reach out to alumni, and how responsive are they? Because I think that's such an important part of business school and what you're investing in.
We do survey our alumni to find out which ones are most interested in being involved. And certainly everybody has different seasons of their life, ones where they are really available and have lots of time to give into certain areas, and others where they may not be. But we have a core group of alumni that are really invested and interested in helping to support the student experience and to help students to be successful, particularly on the career side of things. And so it's really been a joint effort through our career management center and our alumni advancement offices to identify and develop the relationships that we have with some of these key alums. Some of them are serving on advisory groups where they're participating in quarterly calls with the Career Management Center and serving in panel discussions or providing small group or even individual coaching to students that might be looking to get launched into a particular career path after their MBA. Some of them come to campus to recruit for their company. Some of them are involved in more individual outreaches and engagements with students. But typically, within the first few weeks of the MBA experience, once students have gone through a few key trainings, they're given access to the alumni network. And that's a really significant step that the school is taking to make sure that we're providing access and making it as easy as possible. My experience as an alum, I recruit probably between 100 and 200 alums a year to help with everything from on-campus events to MBA fairs in different cities around the US and around the world, to webinars and kind of everything in between. And I can really speak to the power and responsiveness of the alumni network. I have alums that will give up their entire weekend to help do admissions interviewing or to come to Rochester to help with an admissions event that we're hosting so that prospective students can meet alumni. And so I think that that's important to know that the alumni are responsive and they're interested in making an investment, and that the school is also positioned to help coach students through that process, because there's some folks that have had a lot of experience in networking and have a wide network already at their disposal. And I think especially for some of our international students, maybe it's done differently in their home country or home region, or maybe they just have had less experience in it. And so to be able to successfully navigate the alumni network, particularly if the student is looking to find employment in the US, is something where the school wants to support helping the student to be successful in that endeavor.
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk more about that in our careers part of the podcast. But what is Simon known for in terms of its faculty?
Well, I think there's probably a few key areas. The school, for probably at least 3 or 4 decades, has been known, particularly in finance and economics and accounting. We actually started several of the key academic journals right here in Rochester: the Journal of Accounting and Economics, the Journal of Finance and Economics, and the Journal of Monetary Economics. And so you see kind of the economics theme throughout, which I already talked about a little bit earlier. But in several of those key kind of quantitative areas over several decades, we've had not only kind of the academic research that has been kind of an engine from our faculty, but also I would say on the career side, routinely been rated very, very high in those areas by companies, by our students, alumni. The curriculum overall, like I said, is very analytic, economic oriented. And so that has also been kind of a great platform in the areas of brand management and consulting, because those have kind of been emerging areas for us, say, over the past 5 to 7 years. But I would say if you were to ask any of our alumni whether they actually pursued a career in finance and accounting or not, they would probably very quickly point to those areas, as well as economics, as ones that the school is very well known for.
And why should candidates get their MBA in Rochester and New York?
It's certainly not probably a geographic destination that people are always intentionally pursuing, or that people maybe even know a lot about. But I think to find a school that has a reasonable cost of living, which I think is always important when you're thinking about quitting your job and being in business school for a few years, but that has a network that is far more reaching than the region of Rochester, which I think is very important. We have a national and an international network of alumni and corporate relationships. We have a very strong emphasis on helping students, not just with developing the academic training that's necessary to find employment, and that's certainly important. In most years, we're above 90% in our placement within 3 months of graduation. This year, it's looking like it's going to be at least 95%, which is fantastic. But then we overlay, like I said, not just the strong training to actually get the job, but actually to perform. Because at the end of the day, you don't just want to get that first job after business school. You want to be able to advance in your career. And we routinely get feedback from our alumni that they work very closely with students from every other top business school, and they feel that they are not just adequately prepared, but even more prepared than some of the alums that they work with from other top business schools. Also, another important thing, and I know we'll probably talk about it in more detail later, but I should also mention that we're very interested in investing in scholarship support to see top students enroll in the program. And typically, more than 75% of the students that enroll are receiving some level of scholarship support. And so, if you're looking for a great program that will minimize your costs, both in terms of living expenses as well as tuition costs, then I think Rochester should be on your radar as a program to consider.
Maybe we could talk about your admissions process. I saw that you have both a 2-year MBA full-time and an accelerated MBA, 18 months, that starts in January, while your 2-year program starts in the fall. Candidates and our listeners, they always hear about fit, and they know that they have to find a school that fits them and show those fit qualities. So I wanted to ask you, what you're looking for from candidates. Is it different because of your different approach to the curriculum, for example, and whether that's different between your 2-year program and your 18-month program?
So there's a few different things that we'll be looking for broadly in terms of fit. And these sort of sessions that we're having right now are always great to give context because typically students will go right to a class profile, and there's really just a bare bones amount of information that suggests that we're only looking at things like a GMAT score or your academics to make a decision, and it couldn't be farther from the case when we're actually getting into the review of an applicant. Certainly the academics is a small piece of it, and because it is more of an analytics program, we will take a look at someone's quantitative or math background, but interestingly enough, we don't have any mandates or prerequisites of courses that are required to consider somebody for admission. And so I think that's an important message for students because you might be inclined to think that, there's 3 or 4 math courses that are mandated or certain grades in order to be considered. We'll take a look at your quantitative score on the GMAT as well as the courses you've had. And we sometimes maybe make a suggestion of a brush up course or even our math review class to get someone up to speed, but we don't have a certain number of classes or any specific classes that are required to consider a candidate. We also look quite closely at career fit. And by that, I mean, what does a student want to do after business school? How does that align with their prior work experience and typical opportunities that we know to be available relative to the type of experience the candidate has had, the amount of experience that they've had, and the labor market, to be quite frank. And also kind of what our strengths are, what are we known for, and where do we typically see students go. As a smaller school, we are equipped to help students on a more individual basis, and we certainly do that from time to time if a student wants to do something that may be a little bit further afield from the mainstream sort of opportunities. We are actually set up in a way that would be able to help a student conduct an effective job search and be successful. But we also want to make sure that if a student is inclined to a career path that might be different from the typical opportunities that Simon offers, that there's realistic expectations of the level of support and resources that are going to be available and how much investment the school can make versus the kinds of resources that the student may need to put into the process in order to still achieve a successful outcome. And just to give context, the majority of opportunities, probably about 80% that the school facilitates, are in 3 main areas: finance, marketing, and consulting. And there's offshoots to each of those 3 areas. But for the 20% of remaining students that might be thinking about careers in areas like nonprofit or operations management or areas where we can still help a student to find success, there's probably going to be a little bit more effort extended or a less traditional job search that's conducted just because from year to year there's a bit of variation in terms of how many students are actually interested in some of those other areas. The other thing that we're looking for in terms of fit for the school, and I alluded to this a little bit, is leadership initiative and propensity to get involved. And it doesn't need to be involvement in any particular type of path, but I think when you have a smaller school, you really need a large portion of students to step up and get involved in order to still be able to run a breadth of different clubs and student organizations successfully. And so we are looking to see students that have, over the course of their academic experiences and professional experiences, demonstrated that through either initiative. It doesn't have to always be, stepping in and doing something that's brand new, but sometimes it's about identifying the opportunity and the self-assessment that says, I could be part of the solution to this particular opportunity. You asked about the 2-year program versus the 18-month program. I would say probably the biggest difference with the accelerated 18-month program is that students really need to be able to hit the ground running. and especially on the career side. For someone that wants to explore, say, two different possible career paths, the 18-month program might be difficult. You really need to have clear understanding of what you want to do in order to be able to leverage looking for an internship and ultimately landing an internship. Or in some cases, if you're making a career step that's in line with what you've already done previously, an internship may not even be absolutely critical. If you already have some level of work experience and a broad enough network, you may end up taking classes in the summer between first year and second year. But we're going to be evaluating with a little bit more scrutiny, how precise are your career goals? How do they align with what you've done previously, and how quickly do we think you can hit the ground running? Because that program starts in January, and that's typically the time of year when the internship recruiting is starting, or in some cases has already started. And so there's not much time to come in and consider a lot of different options and figure it out. And with the 2-year program, there's still not much window to do that, but there's a tiny window. So you kind of do that gut check, and you maybe came in thinking you wanted to do something. And in many cases, that is what you end up deciding to pursue. But sometimes your career choices are guided by your prior life experiences, and you kind of don't know what you don't know until you are exposed to it. And that's sometimes part of what the business school experience is for the 2-year MBA students, where they are learning about career paths that they hadn't considered previously. And in some cases, want to have a chance to explore that in a little bit more detail.
And do those two classes overlap? Do the accelerated MBA students take classes with the 2-year students? Or are they two separate groups?
There's not much overlap at all for the core classes. They're on different tracks that don't necessarily overlap. But for some of the elective classes, there will be overlap. And it is a small enough school that for co-curricular activities, there will absolutely be overlap. But initially for the core classes, the students are separated.
Got it. I also wanted to ask you about one thing you mentioned in terms of maybe asking applicants to take up a brush-up course to, show their math or quant skills. And I guess this question is not just applied to Simon, but like you were saying earlier, to business schools in general. If an applicant, say they've taken the GMAT 3 times and they can't quite get their quant score up, what can they do, or what specific venues would you recommend that they go to? MBA math or taking a course in their community college? What would help you the most with the decision?
I think it depends on the candidate. The two options you mentioned both could be possibilities. I think some of it depends on someone's background and how they feel they best learn. An online option like MBA math might be suitable if it's really just a brush up, but if someone's been out of school for a number of years, or maybe they were a history or English or liberal arts major and really maybe haven't had much math since high school, a community college course or something where there's more structured learning might be a better choice, just to make sure that there's enough of a foundation that's being developed, that it's not just kind of covering the high level surface areas of math that is needed, but that kind of some of the fundamentals are in place to be successful. And different schools may have different approaches to this. We don't always make the same recommendation for each student. It's going to typically be a dialogue with the student as well as an evaluation following the dialogue to determine what makes the most sense for that particular candidate.
Could our listeners, for example, get in touch with your office and maybe get some recommendations there, like whether they should take statistics classes or whether they should take, accounting classes, or would that happen after the application?
It could be both. Definitely after the application process commences and we're reviewing, that may be initiated by the admissions committee, or in some cases, if a candidate has bandwidth and wants to pursue something, we may give feedback. If we haven't made our admissions decision, then we're always a little bit circumspect in terms of how many hoops we're going to suggest a candidate jump through, unless it's something that could be broad enough that it would be a value add to, any school that the student gets admitted to. But we could certainly give general feedback to a student even prior to applying in terms of what the best approach would be with either taking a class or in some cases trying the GMAT again, or in some cases, I think sometimes candidates get really anxious about things that probably in the bigger scheme of things, 10 or 20 points on the GMAT is probably not going to make the difference on whether somebody gets admitted or not, even though there's always opportunity to continue to make investments and to try to see self-improvement. So we can kind of give some level of context on where to redirect efforts or what's going to truly be the most important at that particular stage to help a student be successful with not just the application, but also the preparation for business school. Because I think that's always kind of the fine line. You want to obviously position yourself in the best possible light with the admissions committee. But at the end of the day, it's not just about getting admitted. It's also about feeling adequately prepared when you step foot on campus and show up in the classroom.
Exactly. And could you just quickly walk us through the life of an application so our listeners understand what happens when they apply?
It's an online application process. And so once you hit submit, there's somebody on our operations team that's just going to make sure that everything that's supposed to be there is indeed there. Once they do that, they'll make updates in the online system so that the candidate can see that everything is complete. That can take up to 3 weeks. I would say most rounds, it's probably 1 to 2 weeks. And as soon as we have updates, we individually update records. It's not something where we batch updates. So as soon as there's an update, you'll know. Then at that point, there's a review, initial review of the application, both to interview the candidate as well as a more thorough review that's being done where every single essay is being read and there's notes and comments that are being added about the candidate. After the interview is conducted, and I should mention that our interviews are conducted blind, which means that the interviewer has not reviewed the candidate's application. So they have their resume, but other than that, they're just conducting the interview only with a resume. And we've chosen to do that because our interview is really based more on employment potential and a lot of the qualitative areas of the candidate's background that would not only add value to a future employer, but also some of the things that I mentioned earlier around propensity to get involved, communication skills, leadership potential, those sorts of things. After the interview is conducted, the interview feedback and then the original feedback from the admission committee review of the candidate is circled back to the admissions committee, and the full admissions committee would review all of that feedback and make a decision. We try to review candidates every few weeks. And as we have decisions released, we will sometimes start to put things out there even before our guaranteed deadline. But we do give a guaranteed deadline by which students will hear depending on what round they apply for. And so some things come out kind of in batches, but it's always kind of just in time for some group of candidates based on when the interview was conducted and just kind of the reality that we can't review every single candidate in a given week. So we'll issue a decision. There will be an email notification that goes to the candidate that there's an update to their application, and they can go in online and check the status of their application for a decision.
Got it. That's really clear. And so you have 5 deadlines from October to May for your August intake and 3 deadlines from June to October for your January intake. And if I may ask about your interviews, who conducts those?
It's mostly full-time admissions staff that are conducting the interviews. We have a few alums that help out, particularly for some of our on-campus events. We have several open house type events called Rochester Simon Weekends, and a candidate can come in on a Friday night and then spend the day with us on Saturday. And one of the options for those candidates is to have an admissions interview. And so for bandwidth reasons, the admissions officers can't conduct all of those interviews. And so we'll have alumni on hand to help with some of those events. And then in some occasions when we're traveling internationally, we may also leverage alumni to help with interviews. But the majority of the interviews are done by our full-time admissions officers.
Would you have any tips there for the interview process for our listeners in terms of how they should prepare and what they can do to make their best possible case?
It's typically a behavioral interview, and so the types of questions that are going to be asked are going to really focus, like I said, primarily on the resume, since that's the only thing that the interviewer has to go off of. And so to the extent to which you want your resume to be as encompassing, to talk to, kind of the progression of your working experience, as well as a few interesting things about you personally that kind of gives an icebreaker to get the conversation started in most cases. In a lot of cases, you're going to be asked to give examples. And so that's really an opportunity to elaborate. We only have one required essay and then a short factoid as part of our online application. And so that really limits how much detail a candidate can go into about some of their accomplishments at work. And so the interview is really the key opportunity to provide some of that. And so, looking through past performance appraisals and looking ahead to the upcoming year and some of the projects that you're currently working on would probably be some of the important preparation and getting ready for the interview and just I think really knowing what you want to convey. If you're talking about leadership, what do you think are some good examples to speak to that, or team skills, or managing team conflict successfully? I mean, there will be certain themes that we'll go at, although the question might be asked in slightly different ways depending on the particular interviewer. But I think just being prepared and practicing are probably the most important things in terms of allowing the interview to really showcase who you are as a candidate.
Yeah, and I also noticed that you only require one recommendation and that a second recommendation is optional. So who would you recommend that applicants to Simon get as their recommender?
So we would strongly prefer either your current supervisor or a recent past supervisor. And I strongly recommend that you attempt to get two recommendations, only because I can't tell you which 10% of the population it's going to be, but at least 10% of our applicants call us or email us in a panic, the day of the application deadline or the day before the application deadline, because their recommender got in a car accident or had a death in the family or some very legitimate issue, but they didn't have a backup. And so the reason for the flexibility of only requiring one but giving the option for two is exactly to avoid those sorts of scenarios. And so, I would strongly encourage candidates to try to find two. And like I said, our preference would be somebody who knows you well enough to be able to provide detailed information about your contributions on the job, either currently or in the recent past. And so sometimes that's a team leader, sometimes it's your supervisor, but it's somebody who knows you not just from a distance, but both what you've done as well as your level of success and what you've been assigned, to be able to give feedback on that, both your strengths as well as some of your development areas, and hopefully how the MBA fits into helping you to develop professionally.
Great. And by recent, you mean less than 3 years as a rough guideline?
That would be ideal, I think. In most cases, the more recent accomplishments and achievements are the ones that the candidate wants to highlight. And so if you're going back too far, then you're probably not giving yourself the best opportunity to be presented to the admissions committee.
Great. And any last admissions tips for our listeners before we talk about financing?
I think giving sufficient lead time is probably the most important, and then just being really careful and proofreading essays and things like that. But we could probably spend an entire session just talking about tips. And I think the important thing is, and kind of our guiding principle in the admissions office, is we don't want this to be a mystery for candidates in terms of how to present yourself. If you have a concern, reach out to us and ask. I mean, I can't do the application for someone, but I'm happy to provide guidance on what we're looking for. I've never seen a perfect application up until now, and I've been in the business a while. But that being said, there are certainly stronger applications and weaker applications. And if you can get yourself into the bucket of stronger applications, you're moving in the right direction toward a successful outcome. And if we can give you guidance in terms of how you can allow your strengths to really be maximized and your weaknesses to be minimized, we would be happy to try to point you in the right direction for that.
We can now talk about your scholarships, which you mentioned at the beginning of the show, and that over 75% of your class is generally awarded scholarships each year. That's really a high percentage. And can you let us know what your average scholarship amounts are, and of course, how applicants can improve their chances of winning scholarship funding?
So we have a range of scholarship support. The scholarships started around $10,000 per year towards the tuition for the program, and they go all the way up to full tuition awards. Obviously, the full tuition awards are very competitive. We also have a very select group of students that are not only receiving full tuition, but they're also receiving a stipend that can be applied toward living expenses. And those students are involved in some capacity, helping with admissions activities and events or other, related activities and support to some of the offices within the graduate business school. during their MBA experience, that is guaranteed support that they have on the front end of $10,000 per year in addition to full tuition. So the average scholarship, when you consider that full continuum, probably is a little bit more than $20,000 per year. And like I said, the profile of the candidate, not just the quantitative GMAT and GPA, we can't completely ignore. And so that's probably the place where students tend to start, or years of work experience and kind of comparing how do I fit. But we look quite closely at, the feedback from the interview and some of the other qualitative areas, particularly the level and type of prior work experience and how we see the student being positioned for leadership opportunities within the business school as well as after graduation. And those are all important things. I would say one of the biggest things to keep in mind in terms of maximizing consideration for funding is timing when you apply. The January 5th deadline is kind of a pivotal one for the 2-year MBA program, in that candidates who apply up to or including that deadline can be considered for our scholarship weekend. And that's an opportunity for students to come on campus and basically increase the scholarship award above and beyond what might have initially been offered at the time of admission. And so there's no opportunity to lose what you already got. There's really only upside potential here. And students basically make an investment to get themselves to Rochester and spend the weekend with us. And so it's a somewhat unique event. I don't know that there's a lot of schools out there that are doing something quite like this, but it's also a great way for students to spend a little bit more time with us once they're already admitted and to meet some of their potential future classmates. And almost all the students who come in and participate do receive an increase. I joke to students that you really have to come in and embarrass yourself and almost make us regret admitting you to not get an increase. I mean, that's really where our mindset is in terms of wanting to offer funding. So there's really a great opportunity if a student is lucky enough to get invited to that scholarship weekend event.
I think that's a great idea and a great initiative you guys do, but I'm just wondering if the admitted students try to one-up each other, because they're kind of competing for funding, right?
So this is how we do it, and I think that we've tried to circumvent that to the extent possible. One of the things that the students do while they're here is a team case presentation where they receive a case ahead of time, but they have to work together with a team of 3 or 4 other individuals. And part of the evaluation during the weekend is that they will evaluate their peers on their team and give a 360 review of their peers. And so the goal is that if you had, like, say, 100 points to allocate across your teammates, how would you evaluate them, in terms of their contributions? And so to some extent, yes, there is a competitive element and we can't completely eliminate that, but we feel that that's given an opportunity to make sure that it doesn't become cutthroat, because at the end of the day, we feel that they should ultimately be really excited by the people that they're meeting and getting to know and developing friendships and looking at it more as a friendly competition as opposed to something that's cutthroat.
You've dropped some clues in our talk in terms of, with your small class size and the culture that you guys want in your program, that initiative and leadership is really, really important, and even for scholarship funding. And I'm wondering is it good for an applicant to say, really understand what student clubs exist at Simon, and even say in their application when they're applying, I think I could be part of the leadership of this club, or I would like to initiate this new competition with this club, or is that too much?
As long as it fits with a student's passions or interests, I think that would be absolutely something that we would encourage. I think it's ultimately part of a student asking themselves the question of what kind of culture experience are they looking for? Are they looking for something where they will be strongly encouraged and put into a situation where that experience is fostered, or are they looking for something where maybe they're going to be a member, but there's not as much expected from them? And if a student is looking for an experience that's really going to stretch them and allow them opportunities to get involved and really facilitate that, then this might be a good fit for a student. So there's pluses and minuses to the type of experience that you get at a bigger school or a smaller school. And I think most of the students that come to Rochester maybe came from a bigger school experience and maybe saw some of the negatives that offered in terms of feeling like they blended in a little bit too much and maybe missed out. But we also have some students that went to a smaller school in undergrad and really enjoyed that and found that that was a good fit for their learning style and the kind of experience they were looking for. And so I think students should be intentional and really understanding kind of the personality of what a school has to offer and finding what works best for them.
Any last financing tips for our listeners? We have a lot of international listeners, and this is one of their biggest concerns.
I think that, like I said, the dates and deadlines are probably the biggest thing. And so January 5th, if it's not already kind of embedded in your mind, it absolutely should be. If funding is important, then you really need to make the application a priority before that deadline to maximize your opportunities. Not to say that there's absolutely no funding available after that point. There may be. It's just going to probably be at a more modest level.
If we can now talk about careers, I sense a real concern and interest in your school making sure that your graduates are placed in good jobs. Can you give our listeners just an overview of, what makes Simon unique from a recruiting and a career management perspective?
So I think that there's a few different things. Like I had said earlier, we are a smaller school, so there is going to be a little bit more customized and individual support that the school offers in this area. And we have structured our career management center with staff that have expertise that's based more on functional area. And so there's someone that has functional expertise in marketing and careers related to marketing broadly. And that could include things like brand management, market research, and consumer behavior, pricing, marketing consulting, but kind of within that broad area of marketing. And the same would go for finance and consulting, some of those key areas. So there will be an opportunity, especially for students that are changing careers, which is probably at least half of the students that are coming into our program. You want to have someone that really can help you navigate through with a level of understanding of what is the employer looking for, what have successful students who've broken into that particular career path typically look like, not just in terms of their career backgrounds, but in terms of their personality profile and kind of strengths and weaknesses, and serving in a more of an advisory role. Not to say, well, you can't pursue your dreams if you come in thinking you want to do something particular, but to make sure that we're not limiting someone to a particular area when we know that we have expertise or opportunities in another area that might be a real interest or strong fit for a student. So we do take a little bit of a consultative approach when we're working with students to make sure that we're really listening to what they want and providing them not only support within the opportunities that maybe they've already identified, but also helping them to explore other areas that may also be a good fit. I would speak maybe particularly to international, since you mentioned that is audience that you're working closely with. Roughly half the students that come to Rochester are from overseas, and so it's a high percentage for a top school. And I think important to note that we understand and appreciate that there are a different set of challenges that international students face, because the majority of those students really desire to get some experience outside of their home country, maybe before returning. And then that's part of the motivation for, studying in the U.S. as opposed to, say, their home country or home region. And so we have an understanding of the work visa process and how to navigate that successfully, how to set up employment search strategically so that you can focus on kind of your dreams and aspirations, but also to have a reasonable backup plan, because if the labor market changes, there's things that create restrictions that are just outside of anybody's ability to control. And ultimately, like I said, we want to maintain the strong history that we've had of placements more than 90%, over a considerable period of time. So we will start with students before they actually enroll. And there's a very heavy emphasis on the first few months of the MBA program, which is typically very rigorous academically as well. So there's a lot going on those first few months, but we have career tracks that the Career Management Center plans. Some of those are in conjunction with student clubs. There's workshops and panels, some that are hosted in different locations around the U.S., some that are hosted here in Rochester that help students to explore different career paths. We take students through a series of job search essentials classes that our Career Management Center staff teach, and that are designed to help students understand this is what a successful MBA job search looks like, so that they understand the timing and they understand the different tools and resources that are available, and also what steps need to be taken on the part of the student in order to be successful and with particular different milestones. So there's a lot that goes into it, and a real desire to partner with the students to lead to those successful outcomes, because it's not just about finding the job, but it's also in some cases about helping a student learn enough about themselves to know what they don't want and what they do want. And so that really is a partnership, and one that we're equipped to help, particularly because of the smaller size of our community here in Rochester.
Yeah, and with that smaller size of a class, are there, for example, less on-campus recruiting events and more one-on-one coaching with helping your students navigate that process, as you've already mentioned?
So it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's no way that we could have 1,000 different companies coming to hire our students each year. Otherwise, most of them would be very disappointed that the students said no, even if they all got hired with an offer. So, we're trying to maintain the appropriate ratio of company relationships. Some companies come to Rochester and recruit on campus. We run several programs in New York City each year, and we've been doing programming in New York City for more than 20 years. So that'll allow us to run Simon-specific interview days where students have one interview, they may have several interviews, and there's also some networking sessions with alumni. And we have also replicated that same type of event in Chicago a few years ago, and have plans to do so in a few other key markets in the Northeast and on the West Coast. But we also have really appealed to what we think recruiters are asking for, which is, I only need to hire one person, or, I only need a person with this type of background. And so rather than weeding through 50 resumes because a school that might be larger might have a bigger roster of candidates to provide, the company saying, I really only want to see this type of student. And so we can be a little bit more precise because we know our students well, to be able to say, here's 10 or 15 students who might be interested, but this student or these 2 or 3 students meet the exact specifications that you're looking for. And that's really what companies are asking, not just of Rochester, but from every other MBA program. Make it easier for me to find the exact candidate that our hiring manager is asking for. And so with the knowledge that we have of our students, we're able to do that successfully.
Drawing on your own experience in the MBA program, and then now having overseen the MBA program for many years, what are the traits that define your favorite classmates and the most successful graduates of the program in terms of careers? What are those really strong shared characteristics, if there are any, that help students get their dream or target jobs?
I think self-awareness is a big one. And I don't think that that's just to be said for Rochester, but probably any other top school, and self-awareness to find the school that's right for you and to find the career that's right for you. And sometimes the tendency, and not just in business school, but in life in general, is you see, a bunch of students that are going after a particular career path. And so it looks appealing because there's a flock of people that are headed in that direction. And you don't really take time to take stock and determine whether or not that's the right fit for you. Being willing to ask yourself the hard questions and to really understand what it takes to be successful in a particular career path, and then doing the inventory within your own background and experiences and strengths and weaknesses is really important. That would be advice that I would give to anybody, whether they're looking at business school or a different type of career or profession, is that taking the time to do that and finding 1 or 2 mentors or people in your life that will get to those gut check questions, like, are you really sure that this is what you want, and that know you well enough to be able to help you navigate through that experience. Because I think a lot of it does come down to fit, not just for business school, but afterwards, finding the right company fit, finding the right position fit, and realizing that may change 2 or 3 times over the course of your career. So building in enough flexibility so that if you end up doing something for a series of years and are wildly successful, but your life circumstances change or the industry shifts, that you're putting yourself in a situation where you still have options for yourself later on.
What was your favorite part of the program when you were a student?
I picked the program at Rochester. My undergraduate background was in business, but I didn't feel that I had as strong of the quantitative and analytical skills as, at least in the terms of the confidence in those areas, I guess would be the best way to say it. And so, even though I wasn't choosing to go into a career in finance or accounting, I wanted to be in a program that was going to be focusing on the quantitative and analytical areas. So I think that honestly, and the preparation that I got through the academic experience, as well as the friendships that have developed and have ensued, particularly through the line of business that I have, because I don't have to work very hard at maintaining my network because I do it every single day for the type of job that I have. And so that's been really fantastic. But I certainly wouldn't have told you 10 or 15 years ago that this would have been the career that I would have chosen. But given the interactions that I have with very, very intelligent faculty who are at the top of their game in different disciplines, I don't have a PhD, but I'm invited to the table to interact and have conversations with these individuals, and the confidence that I feel that the degree is offered to me through the rigorous training is really significant, that I feel equipped to be able to go into those conversations. It would never replace having a PhD. I wouldn't want to suggest that, but to feel confident to be a partner at the table for those conversations and to feel equipped to prepare for those meetings and conversations and really have an understanding of what's going to be expected of me as a manager. I feel that the school has significantly exceeded my expectations in that area.
And what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with students?
Well, I would suggest that they go through the admissions office if they're looking to make a connection. And depending on where somebody's located, we also run events here on campus in Rochester, as well as in different locations around the US and around the world. And most of those events will also include current students and or alumni. In some cases, we can't send students halfway around the world, but in the cases where we're running an event in an international location, in all likelihood, we have one or several alumni that are helping to either co-host the event with admissions officers, or in some cases, they're hosting the event in lieu of admissions officers. And so those events, as we know them, are listed on our website, and students are really encouraged to come to those events if it fits their schedule. If they don't find an event that is either in their geography or that they can make work, then they are welcome to reach out to the admissions office via email. And we have current students that are part of our ambassadors program that are ready to connect with current students over Skype or over email and make sure that their questions are answered. And I would never see talking to myself or one of our admissions officers as a substitute for having a conversation with a student who's going through that experience right now.
Fantastic. So, Rebekah, I just want to thank you again for joining the Touch MBA podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.